Welcome to a very special program for Traumatically Triumphant. Today, I am very honored to have a new friend that I've met over in the last few weeks, Rena Finder. She has an amazing story that starts in Europe and ends, well, doesn't end yet, but it continues all the way to here in America. And I don't want to say too much. So, Rena, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us where you're from, and let's start from the beginning, and we'll see where we end up.
My name is Rena Finder. I was born in Krakow, Poland, and I had a very happy childhood until 1939 when the Germany invaded Poland. And that's, of course, when life stopped and then the other life began. Because, of course, Germany, by invading Poland, were extremely anti-Semitic, and basically there was anti-Semitism always in Poland and really all over the world.
Hmm.
That some people suffer from it more than others. I don't remember any bad things that happened to me when I was little. I do remember that when I went to the first grade and played outside at recess, one of the little girls picked up a stone and threw it at me, and she called me the dirty Jew. And I remember coming home and say to my mother, "Why did she call me dirty? I took a shower this morning." And my mom tried to explain to me that not everybody's gonna like me, and I'm not gonna like everyone, but not to pay too much, just to ignore it.
Right. I have a different story, but of a different friend of mine where he's a black man. He's in his 60s now, and he was growing up in America, and he was very young, and he ran up to a white water fountain in America when it was still segregated, and he was about to drink from it, and his mom slapped him and said, "That's not for you, that's not for you." And then this little white girl who was even younger than him walked up to it looked like a really nasty water fountain spigot it said colored water only, and she turned it on, and she goes, "Mommy, how come there's no color in the water?" She thought it was colorful water. So it's funny to me that when you're a kid and you don't really understand what hate is. So they're like, why would they call me dirty Jew when I'm not dirty? So it's to me that starts to get at like the core of, I think, what we'll talk about, which is, where does hate come from, and how does it even make sense? Because even the insults that they're saying to you, they're not even real. So okay, so you grew up. What did your parents do for a living at that time?
My father was working for a company very similar to Johnson Johnson, and he traveled a lot, and my mom was home.
Okay.
And women in those days,
Right.
once they get married and had children, I don't know, a child,
Yeah.
she stayed home and took care of me.
Okay. And so overall, up until big things changed, would you describe your childhood as pretty happy and pretty?
I would describe my childhood as extremely happy. My mom came from a large family, my father also from a large family. There were 8 brothers, and I would say that I was surrounded by love from certainly grandparents, aunts, and uncles, cousins who were older than me, and played
uh,
with the younger one. And I guess my father made probably good money. We lived in a beautiful, to me to this day, it's a beautiful apartment. And actually, a lot of my teachers and students, when they go to Poland, they go to Krakow and they go to see. I always tell them, go to see my house.
yeah.
Of course, it was an apartment house, and we rented an apartment, but I always called it my house.
Yeah. Well, I think also it's different, in other countries, people that it's very common to live in a nice big apartment that is basically your house, I think. Um,
And,
so, oh,
and I
sorry.
say that, of course, everything changed overnight when the German invaded Poland and took them just a couple of days.
Right. So I guess, some people who are more familiar with that part of history and some people are less. From your perspective, and I know, and we've talked about this, that memories change over time, but if you can kind of like, your childhood sounds so great up until a certain point. Of course, there are things that are difficult. People aren't as accepting, but that can happen to anybody anywhere. Do you remember, how old you were? And like, was there a moment where you kind of, things are really not, something is wrong, something is wrong in my world. Um,
Well, I would say that that didn't happen to me till I was in the first grade. And I found at one time also some of the teachers treated us, the Jewish students differently.
mhm.
Uh, One thing that I remember, and that was I was in third grade. I remember that the art teacher gave us the homework, and we were to draw swastika.
Huh. So you were supposed to draw a swastika for homework.
Yeah.
I
I remember knowing enough already by that time about Hitler and anti-Semitism. And I came home and I told my mom, of course. And there were only about 4 Jewish girls in my class. The rest were all non-Jewish. And I remember my mom came and organized the other Jewish mothers, and they went to school and they went to the director. That time there was no principal, they called them director. It was a woman, and it was an all-girls school. In those years before the war, there was no, boys went to one school, girls went to another school.
right.
And I remember that I am, of course, upset. And then the director talked to the art teacher, and she told that she said, okay, the Jewish girls don't have to draw swastika, they should draw a horse.
They should draw a what?
Just a horse instead of the.
Okay. Just okay. So they really didn't care. So it's interesting. They're, as a school, they're promoting what Hitler is saying, and their way of sort of not making the Jews do it is just not letting the Jews learn anything new or do anything new. They're just go do something, and we'll deal with you later.
I,
Okay.
I thought I was a very good student, but
Yeah.
I was certainly very bad when it came to drawing. So I remember my mom drew a horse, and I showed it to school as one. I think that was the only time that my mom did something like that, that I would do something like that. But I felt the hate coming from that teacher. It didn't
Interesting.
last very long, and then, of course, once the war started, Jewish children were not allowed to go to school anymore. And everything that we own the Germans started to take away from us. They took away our freedom.
Right. So how long, sorry to, how long from, I guess, when you started to see these changes in your school to then you can't go to school to then you can't own this, like, do you remember roughly how long that was? Was it very fast or?
It was going fast.
Yeah.
It was going fast because while Germans were fighting, going towards Russia, um, the Germans who remained in the cities immediately started to deal with the Jewish questions, as they called it.
Right.
And of course, we didn't realize it because how could anyone imagine
Yeah.
that there will be people who were not human?
Yeah.
But what the Germans did was something so inhuman that I don't know how God, if there is God, how could he allow it to happen?
Right. I mean, I think that's the hardest question, I think, and maybe we'll save that for later. But um, it's luckily I grew up in Jewish schools where we listened to Holocaust survivors telling us their stories, and it was always something that was interesting to me. But that question was always, I think certain survivors have their own takeaways, and us kind of regular people, I find it useful to listen to and not to then cast my own opinion, but just to listen and understand. Um, because yeah, I for the life of me can't imagine what that would be like. So as things are starting to change, what was, I guess, the biggest, you know, moment? So you started to have, they're starting to teach you things in school, then they're not letting you go to school. You're not going to be in your house for much longer. Do you remember what that was like, having to, to leave your home? And
That was horrible
yeah.
because they took everything away from us day by day. And when we were finally uh, got a permit to remain in Krakow, because most of there was before the war there were about 50,000 Jewish families living in Krakow, and we were all going to be murdered,
Mm.
one one family at a time.
Really?
10 ways we were told to work for Germany, but of course people were killed.
Really?
One,
Um, Rena, I'm not sure. I'm going to ask if you're able to sit up a little bit, because maybe we can see your mouth. Yeah, there we go. I want to see. Um, so, um, about that. So, with the families in Krakow that you were describing, did you see any of the real horrors from the Nazis in Krakow, or was it after they sort of took you away?
we saw the horror right away when the Germans came.
Yeah.
As they started to, first of all, the very religious Jews, when they were walking on the street, they would be stopped, surrounded by the soldiers, and they would be beaten. Their
Oh.
hair was caught. They were told they had to wash the sidewalk in the winter. They had to clean the snow. It is from the moment we marched in. They started to take our freedom away,
Yeah.
take away, then our homes away. Then they moved us into the ghetto, or the Krakow ghetto. Um, Not everybody got permits. We were sent away. We were told to go to work to help farmer grow food, and we believed in it because a human being to this day cannot imagine how people who at one time were considered brilliant and famous for its music, composers and
Right.
writers and
And
so,
thinkers, and yeah. I
and how could somebody like that, from country like that, what
Yeah.
happened? How could people be so inhuman? They
Yeah.
call us inhuman, but they were not human.
Right. To me that's interesting, and I think maybe in my email to you, I started talking about it. I know in my personal experience, I during college I wrote a paper or an essay about Nazi propaganda, and then I'll admit that I actually rewrote the same paper again for a different class, and improved it quite a bit. And that, to me, the reason I wrote it is, I what you were just saying about how can this amazing society, this advanced society, how is it so easy to just all of a sudden, maybe it was your neighbor, your doctor, your lawyer, your friend. Now all of a sudden people are like, oh, yeah, go get that person over there. They're not following your rules, and they don't really care. Do you think that the average people really didn't understand the same way you couldn't believe what was really happening? What?
I think that German people believed in Hitler, and those who didn't, they were sent to a concentration camp. And some of them didn't because they were afraid that they didn't say.
Right.
But I would say that there was no kindness that I know of
Right.
from any of the Germans. And in Poland too, there was such anti-Semitism in Poland that, but there was also underground people. There were people that would help take a Jewish child and try to save the Jews throughout the war, and kept it after the war when the parents didn't come back for them.
Yeah.
But and there are many books written of those that we call the righteous Gentiles.
Yeah. Amazing stories.
And
Um,
but but I would say that 99% of non-Jewish people were happy to see the Jews being murdered.
it's so like that. I mean, it makes my heart sink that anybody would be happy about anybody else suffering. But why? My limited understanding of the history is that Germany was in a tough spot economically. Europe was in a tough spot economically. It is so crazy to me as a regular human being, I think, that therefore you could put all of your energy not only into hating someone, but into thinking that they are the problem, that destroying them on every level is a solution. Again, I don't know if you have thoughts on it. It's just, to me, it's something that always has been just very impossible for me to like wrap my head around. And it's crazy. So I guess without getting too deep into that, so you've been taken away from your home. Are you still with your you're still with your family at this point, correct?
I still with my parents, and we were not allowed to take anything from the apartment, except I remember my father rented a small carriage, like a push
Mm-hmm.
cart with a bed and cotton pants and some clothes, very little. We just had to leave everything there.
Yeah.
And I remember walking out of my bedroom and looking back at the bookshelves. I had the shelves full of books I used to love to read, and I still do. And I remember I had a lot of Shirley Temple dolls, because whenever I had, got a good grade at the end of the school, then I would have a choice of a gift from my parents. A Shirley Temple doll because I love them, or a book.
Right.
So
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine leaving my house with everything in it. My family were like terrible at throwing things away, and we're terrible at keeping things organized. We have a lot of people over, so we always have stuff all around. Even now I have that problem, and it's like just that, especially as a kid, seems really hard. Luckily, as a kid, I think you have that mindset of, oh, well, this is just something new, and you sort of keep adapting, but then I you it's like you also keep getting into worse and worse situations. You keep getting pushed into a darker place, into a harder to survive place. So can you, I guess, for those of us who aren't as familiar, like explain kind of what it was like to be put in the ghetto? What was, what were the meals like? What were you, some people definitely know about it, but again, there are
Well,
people out there who,
first of all, when you leave your home behind and you march towards the ghetto, which was like on the other side of the river,
mm-hmm,
this, in Krakow, and people standing on the road and saying, "Good riddance to, don't ever come back."
mm,
And then you walked into the ghetto behind the walls, behind surrounded by soldiers, and we were assigned an apartment. I remember a very old building. It
mm-hmm,
was so old that the bathrooms were outside in the hall. So you lived on the fourth floor, and you had four other apartments. Or there were like four or five
mm,
toilets outside.
yeah.
You didn't have any. And then we were so we had a tiny room with one bed for my parents and one smaller bed for me. And then we were sent to work. You had to have a job. If you didn't get a permit to work, then you would be sent. You would
So,
be to Auschwitz.
right. And so, okay, so at the time that you're in the ghetto, you are allowed to, or you're not allowed to, you have to work. What kind of jobs, what, what was
Uh,
available?
what the Germans did in the ghetto was they created workshops. So people who before the war owned factories, for example, making coats, uh, they moved it into the ghetto.
Okay.
And I worked in a Papiergemeinschaft. That means in a sort of a printing shop was
Mm-hmm.
somebody who owned a printing shop. And it was like around the clock. There was one shift that worked from 7 in the morning till 7 at night, 1 week, and then next week it would be, from 7 at night till 7 in the morning.
Okay.
And
And
the whole time that you were there, of course, every day, there were no stores to buy any food, and people were starving, people were sick, and then tried to go to the hospital
right.
because every morning the Germans came to the hospital and they would kill the people who were sick of the plague. So the Germans, every other week, they would have everyone come. I remember this was summer already, and they had desks set outside, and you had to go and stay in line and to get a permit to work.
Yeah.
And each time they were given less and less permits, and more people were disappearing, and we never heard from them, even though we were told that they were going to work on a
It,
farm.
it, it
There were
feel
rumors about Auschwitz. There were rumors about Auschwitz, but people didn't believe it. How could you believe it?
right. Well, yeah, that reminded me of two things, or made me think of two things. One is, it feels like in the time that they weren't actively killing Jews, they were trying to kill the Jewish spirit so that they would want to die. Meaning, like what you're saying is, you have to work around the clock. You have to work. You can't really get sick. You can't really go anywhere if you get sick. You can't really feed yourself. You can't really do this. But they're keeping you sort of your body intact, but your mind and your spirit, they're trying to completely destroy so that when it does come time for them to finish, there's not going to be a fight. There's not going to be an uprising, or so that's like one thing that sort of jumped at me, which is truly evil. And then you were talking about hearing about Auschwitz as a rumor. I had the privilege of hearing a speaker. He was an American GI who went over and liberated, I think if it wasn't Auschwitz, it was another pretty major camp. And they really had heard rumors about these things, but all of a sudden, I mean, he just, they had no idea. And even when he was describing them coming over a hill, sorry?
The Americans, um, when they marched into Mauthausen
Mm-hmm.
or Bergen, which were concentration camps in Germany, they could not believe what they saw.
Yeah, I mean, this man,
Yeah, they didn't tell. They didn't tell anybody for
because
years.
yeah, and he had been, he described losing one of his friends who was a soldier, and he's still emotional about it. And he was still emotional, but then when he described what he saw, he said there was nothing. He goes, I was from Iowa. He goes, there was nothing that ever could have prepared me or my other soldiers, even after seeing all this death, which we weren't prepared for on the battlefield. There
No,
was nothing that could have prepared us for, I wish I remembered all the words that he said, but it was just, I mean, he was still crying about it 70 years later, and he wasn't, thankfully, for himself, not the one who had to survive that entire experience. So it's, yeah, I mean, it makes my blood curdle thinking about it, and knowing that I've, known so many people who've had to go through it. It's like, it's unthinkable. So okay, so you guys, your family has been living in the ghetto. How long were you there? And then until the
we,
next part?
we were in the ghetto probably um, 2 years. And then my father was taken away. My mother's parents were taken away.
Mm-hmm.
My, their sister and her two children and her husband were taken away. And we were told that they were sent to work in a farm someplace in Germany.
Right.
Because what you heard about Auschwitz, you could not believe. You could not believe that something like that could exist. But there was underground,
Right.
and people, not just Jewish people, but there were some Polish people that wanted to help. But they were very few. You think about the people, mostly there was such anti-Semitism in Poland that mostly they were happy that the Jews were being killed.
It's just, that's so, yeah, I mean, it's it's amazing. I don't even know. Okay, so at this point, now you're 2 years into what I would consider a living hell. And then
The ghetto
you're
liquidated.
right. And then, so the ghetto's liquidated, which,
We were going to be sent to another camp that was built a little bit about 2 miles outside of the ghetto on two Jewish cemeteries.
oh,
They sent men, two Jewish men, to build, level the ground and build barracks. And so you can imagine what happens when you start building barracks on the graves of other people.
hmm,
They were taking the stones away and sealing it. They were using it for driveways, for walks. And the time came that we had to leave the ghetto. It was my mom and me. We were taking care of my little cousin whose parents were taken away, and we were hiding her. And I thought I could take her with me, but they didn't let me go with her. They took her away, and they said to me, actually, it was the Jewish police. They said they will go, children are going to be in the orphans home, and the nuns would take care of them.
hmm,
So I left her, and as I walked out of the ghetto with the people I worked with, I realized that some of them in their backpack had their little children who were, given fields to sleep. And those were some of them lucky people that who were able next day when they went to work that they had some Christian friends who would take the child and try to save it.
Hmm.
But those people were in danger not because of the Gestapo, but the neighbor, because if the neighbor would suspect them of doing something good for the Jews, then they would tell the Gestapo and then the whole family of them.
Yeah, I mean that's again going back to this like system of killing the spirit is, you know, it's one thing for the government to enforce things, but then to have every single citizen and you know encouraging them to like bring these people to, I don't know, their deaths or their demise is just, yeah, it's unthinkable. I do have one question. Was there a situation where you personally, because you know in your book, um, which is written more for children and younger people, was there a situation where you, other than generally what was going on, where you were shaken to your core in some way that just,
We were the commander of the camp was among death.
mm-hmm,
Among death, one of the most dangerous murderers. He used to stand on his balcony and kill people just for the fun of it. And I remember that standing uh, and he was walking behind. I never looked at his face. I always looked straight
hmm,
so that I wouldn't see his face. When after the war, after he was hanged, when they showed me his picture, I didn't know it was him because I never really looked at his face.
wow,
But I remember when we were working, I don't remember what we were doing, we were standing, and women, like 500 women, and he was right behind me, and he shot the girl that was standing next to me from the back, in the back, for no reason.
hmm. Yeah. Oh, so and that person was portrayed, if I recall, which is actually a good transition for where we're going to get to the next part of the story, which is part of the happier part of the story. So he was, that character was portrayed in the movie Schindler's List, correct?
Yeah,
Right. So he was played by, I think it was Ralph Fiennes in that movie, and yeah, he was pretty evil in that film. So in real life, I could imagine. Well, I can't really imagine, but yeah,
then
horrible.
Mom and I, we were also very lucky because we heard about Oskar Schindler. There were people who worked for Oskar Schindler, and they would come, and when they would come to the barracks at night, they would say how wonderful a man he was.
Mm-hmm.
The Oskar Schindler, even though he was born in Czechoslovakia, he was a German, and he was very ambitious. He wanted to make a lot of money, to be able to have expensive cars, expensive horses, expensive lady friends.
Yeah.
And he decided he was one of the first in Czech Republic to join the Nazi Party. And
Interesting.
but he did not join. He did join the Nazi Party, but he joined them because he wanted to take over a factory in Krakow and become rich.
Right.
So he was bribing people, the, the generals and the people who had a lot to say. And he was able to take over the factory that was making pots and pans before the war. And then so he took part of the factory to make ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was the best of friends with all the important generals. And he became a very good friend of Amangert because he needed his people to come to work in the morning once we left the ghetto and lived in the barracks. We had to go walk. But everybody was saying how wonderful he was. And then my mother heard that he was going to hire more people. And I remember that she sent me to the Jewish policeman who would be in charge, and he was a friend of my father. And why she sent me, why she didn't go, I never had a chance to ask her. Never thought about asking her because it was too late.
Mm-hmm.
And he put my mom and me on the list.
Wow.
So I and my mom joined 150 women to come and work for Oskar Schindler, who built a small camp next to the factory.
Hmm.
And so we left, so we were able to leave Amangert and Krakow behind us. And Oskar Schindler treated us as human beings. The barracks were small and we had bunk beds. There was better food. I remember every now and then we got an egg. I remember everybody was shaking that egg. And, you know, without cooking it or anything,
Yeah.
and putting pieces of bread inside.
Yeah.
It was, and he even had a little barrack where like a little hospital. I remember I had pneumonia and I was in the barrack for 3 days. If I was in a classroom, I would be killed on the first day I went in.
Yeah.
So,
So it's interesting. Your description of Oskar Schindler is like, it's so interesting to me because he wasn't, he ended up being an incredibly heroic, brave person. But
yeah.
what's funny about that to me is it seemed to be driven by a pretty normal, selfish passion to be successful, to be liked. And so therefore, which is interesting, he decided that there was no room to hate one person or another. He'd have to make friends with certain Nazis. He'd help other people to get cheap labor, but he's not going to, so it's so interesting that he's this hero, but with
What,
such normal.
what happened is that as he started the factory and started to get friends with the general, and he was realizing what was their plan when it came to the door,
Hmm,
and he was not going to let it happen to his people.
gotcha.
It
Okay.
was it was when he realized, I think, that the Jews were going to be murdered,
Right.
and probably while we all had rumor about Auschwitz, nobody believed it. But of course, nobody ever came
Right.
from Auschwitz.
I mean,
I
yeah.
I know that there some of the Polish underground people were talking and telling people what Auschwitz was about. The people were burned,
Hmm.
and but who believed?
Okay. So that's nice. So he started normal, and then as he realized what was happening, because he was so well connected, it went from okay, cheap labor to this is actually something that I need to be like part of the solution for. So
Absolutely.
I mean, but again, to me, that shows that you don't need to be born a hero to be a hero. You can be doing something that's very normal, take a step out, look at, well, what am I doing, how am I impacting, and what's going on, and then say, I have a chance to be helping these people while they're also helping me. And that,
It,
especially at the time, was very brave.
it seems to me now that if people could get rid of their hate If the people would look at me and not maybe spit at me because they know I'm Jewish, if the people will look at a black person and not see that they are black, but they are human beings just like everybody else, if the people would realize that it doesn't matter who your God is, whether you are Christian or Muslim or Jewish, under your skin, if you cut your finger, everybody's blood is red.
Yeah.
So we are all human. We are all human. We are all built the same way. We have the same brain. And if
Yeah.
the people just could look at each other as a human being, then the world would be a different place.
I agree. How do you think, as people, and you may not have this answer, that's okay, but how do you think, or what have you seen in the years that you've been telling your story, in the years that you've been seeing the world evolve and devolve? um, what do you think is a method that helps to get rid of our hate? um,
Well, I know that I've been speaking to students all over the world
yeah.
for almost 40 years. And I find that I get letters from the students who are now fathers or grandfathers that they would write to me and tell me that I changed, my story changed their lives.
Wow.
I think if we can, people could accept each other, because I'm sure that the God in heaven, whoever people believe in, does not want the people to kill each other.
I agree with you fully. It's, you know, I had another experience while teaching a fifth grade class. I was talking about slavery and segregation in America, and um, I was trying to explain to them that America, the policy was, if you were African or black skin, you were a slave most likely, and you didn't have rights, and you didn't. And my students, who are Orthodox Jewish kids growing up in a pretty, one dimensional kind of community, they still could not understand the idea that somebody's skin color should be a reason to hate them, enslave them, etc. And it's interesting because they knew in their head that slavery at one point existed in America. They knew in their head that segregation was a problem in America. But when they actually had to look at what the fact was people, only because of their skin color, were being treated a certain way, did not make sense. So that's why when I was asking about the hate, I feel that we teach this hate, and that when then you encounter someone like you, or you encounter someone who you've only heard about in these stories or in these made up, terrible messages, that when you finally encounter someone and you have a conversation that goes a little bit deeper than their skin color, you start to see, oh, they're part of a family. Oh, they want to, have a good dinner. It's like we all like the same things more or less. And yet we seem to get taught and programmed so many negative things.
I have never seen Afro-American person till I came to Austria after the liberation. And we came after the liberation. We all went to Poland and found out that everybody in the family was dead. And so people went back I went because I knew somebody was telling me, somebody who survived and who knew me told me, a good friend of mine survived and was in Linz, Austria, in a little camp. And it was until I went to Austria, I remember walking on a street and there was the GIs And I think there was a sign for whites only.
Mm.
Then there was sign completely, and I said, well, what does it mean?
Yeah.
I didn't understand. And I looked at, a black American soldier. I didn't see a black person. I saw a soldier
Right.
who who fought to make us free.
Yeah.
I just could not, and to this day, I feel the same way.
Yeah.
I cannot, I cannot understand because after all, the Jews were, I think we were the first people that were harmed. I mean, we were not free.
Right. Yeah.
It
No,
took
it's
Moses to liberate us from the Egyptians.
right. Yeah, and it's funny growing up, even though my skin certainly is that of a white European person, it's a hard thing to just consider Jews white because we're so many different things, and also that's the least important part of our identity is like the color of our skin on the outside. So I know for some people it is more important, but I think the more importance we place on that versus how you act, how you treat other people, how you think, those things I think are really critical. So we I this is a great discussion. I am curious. I have like two questions that I still wanted to ask about. I guess they're sort of connected. Is before we get too quickly out of some of the childhood stuff, which is if you're living your life day to day, knowing that it could be your last at a moment, how did you? I guess being in the factory was much better. But in the days where you weren't there, which I know you were there for a little bit, and then you came back to the camp, and then you got brought back to Oscar's factory. But
But when we came back from the factory in Krakow, we were in Krakow for a short time while the factory was being moved to Czechoslovakia, to Brünitz. So we didn't, and the Armageddon was not there anymore.
okay. But how
So
did how did you, in your own head, because I've heard very different stories, and this, how did you in your own mind keep yourself positive enough to survive? Because sometimes when you're not eating, when you don't have all these things, it is the difference of your brain keeping you alive, or your heart, or versus the physical conditions. You're in pretty bad conditions, but you seem like a very positive person. What kept you going during this time, I guess?
well, first of all, I believe that the Oskar Schindler will save us, that we will be able to, that, that going back to Krakow and for Armageddon not being there,
Mm-hmm.
I felt secure knowing. But you know
Okay.
what we were doing when we were in Krakow? I mean, there were four of us, my mom and me, and then another girl, my age, who of course became my lifelong friend
Yeah.
and mother. We were packing boxes of the things that the Germans were stealing. They were art, they were clothing, they were silver and gold, and we were making packages that the Germans were taking it and sending it to Germany.
Hmm.
So we had great hope,
Right.
and the time came, and we were sent on a train. We were sure we were going to Oskar Schindler,
Okay.
but when the train finally stopped and we got out, and I looked around and I saw miles and miles of barbed wire, and I looked up and there was the sign Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Yeah.
And I didn't, that's when, but I still was hopeful because
Right.
I said that Oskar Schindler would save us.
And and did you find for people, let's I guess maybe people even your age at the time, was there a big difference that you found and some people had that hope that tomorrow someone's going to come or tomorrow the Americans are going to hear about this or tomorrow, was there kind of a difference between let's say you and others where they're like this is life, no one's coming to get us, and do you remember that?
I think that the people on Schindler's List, we had such high hope
Mm-hmm.
that would come and save us because this was a train that everybody
Right.
was taken from Prussia by that time already. And we were put in different separate trains.
Right.
And we were taken to separate barracks. Of course, we were all taken to be shaved and put into the room where we thought that we were going to be killed already, but we were lucky because we were not gassed. We had water. We were in
Right.
full power. And
Right.
we were there for 3.5 weeks. And by that time, weight. We
Yeah.
were both very skinny, we were sick, we were hungry. But Oskar Schindler did come
Yeah.
and took us out.
So which
And once we got to Schindler's factory in Bremen, we never doubted for a moment that we would not survive.
So is that you just brought up an interesting thing because your story, out of all the stories so far that I've been talking about, they're all completely different in my opinion, but there is none that really quite compares to someone who's gone through what you've gone through, unless maybe you're from Cambodia or Rwanda or Darfur, where they've had attempts at genocide that are almost as vicious and horrendous as um, the Holocaust. But what's interesting is that in almost every single situation that I've speaking to people where they've had a really rough either patch in life or a rough upbringing or something working against them was that there was someone, a mentor, a friend, an uncle, an aunt, someone who kind of decided you're in this bad world. I'm going to show you that you're able to be better than that and that the world is able to be better. And in your case, obviously you had your mother there and you had some friends, but Oskar Schindler is kind of like he became that person that gave hope to hundreds, if not thousands of people at a time that otherwise there was no hope, and in reading your book, it wasn't just him, it was his wife, it was the entire group that was there now believing that there is hope in the world again. And so it's remarkable how much of a difference one person can make in a positive way to
Absolutely.
so many people. And I find that amazing, which is actually leading me to my next question, because you are one person, Rena, and you have written a book and you have probably spoken, I'm guessing, to thousands of people. What is, and you've kind of spoken about, getting rid of our hate, but what is, I'm sure there's a few, what is the driving motivation that A, keeps you going as strong as you are today, but also as committed as you are to having to talk about this, the worst of the worst of the worst of human life, that you've experienced it, but you are not, it doesn't seem to be bringing you down at this point. It seems to be empowering you and empowering others. If but maybe I'm wrong. So I kind of want to hear about what you then took after all this and what keeps the driving force going.
Well, I feel that I need to share my story to teach the younger generation not to be a bully.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the things that I try to convey to the people I'm talking to
Right.
about hate and about bullying and telling and also don't think you are better than somebody else does because they have different religion or a different color.
Right.
And I tell the kids in school, you know, you may have a friend that's black if you don't want him, but you know, if you cut your finger, your blood is red and his blood is red. So under your skin, inside, you're all the same.
Yeah.
And if you go in, especially the bully, I always tell the kids a bully is a coward because a bully will always attack somebody who is smaller.
Well, and the other thing that I say about a bully is the bully is only blaming you or trying to make fun of you or trying to hurt you because of something that they don't want to deal with themselves. They don't want to deal with that they might have a problem that they have to discuss and deal with and be open about. So they'd rather blame you, the Jew or the pretty girl or the not attractive kid in the class, whatever it is, the nerdy, you know, whatever thing that they are feeling bad about, they're going to just transfer that, which is very cowardly. um, you made me thought of something else.
And I feel that I don't want the world ever to forget about Oskar Schindler
Mm-hmm.
because this is such a one. Imagine this whole world. It was one person, one German, who had wanted to save Jewish people.
Yeah.
Where was the millions of the other Germans that just stood by and watched? I mean, the concentration camps were next to a little town or a little village.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of those stories where you hear about just how close your neighbor, maybe from 6 months ago, is now in this terrible, terrible death camp, is just so, yeah, like I couldn't imagine. And so to me, it's amazing that you had the experience of getting to know Oskar Schindler and that he's kept, you know, he's a huge reason why we're able to have this conversation. And that brings me, I think, something that we spoke about on the phone, and I can't help but think, because I see so many posts on the internet nowadays about, and I see it from both sides of the politics, and I don't really like it on either side, but a lot of people are saying things where they're talking about how the media is being a bit like the Nazis, or if you support this, you're basically a Nazi, or if you do this, you're a Nazi. And to me, that is a very, very, very dangerous way to start labeling people. It's also a very disrespectful thing for many people who are definitely not even close to what a Nazi is. So I guess, you know, I don't want to put you on the political plug right now, but I am curious. It's been almost 80 years, and here we are in this weird time in the world where I feel that we've been going backwards in terms of how we relate to each other, in terms of how we respect each other. Um, and it's not just race, it seems politics, it seems just human. So I'm just curious, like, if you have any thoughts on like where we are now and if there's a message to kids or to adults or anything.
But I feel now it's 75 years after the war,
Yeah.
and I feel that things are beginning to look like 1933 in Germany, when people, with everything, with the anti-Semitism, with the neo-Nazis, I still, I can't believe it's happening. I can't believe that nobody really speaks up.
And what should specific, I mean, if you have something, what is the specific element that's like, because I have my own perspective, and then it's funny because I'll have a conversation with a friend and they'll see it exactly the opposite of the way that I see it, you know, and they're respectful about it, at least in the beginning, and then we start to disagree, and it's like then things start to unravel. And so when you say you're seeing this sort of rhetoric, in what sense specifically? If you can share that.
Well, when it comes to the neo-Nazis, who are
Mm-hmm.
getting very strong now,
Yeah.
and of course anti-Semitism, and the Muslims. I mean, the people who are being murdered now.
Right.
I see the war. I see
Yeah.
horrible things happening, and not people are not doing enough.
Yeah, and I think, and I agree with you that I think we're still getting too caught up on either what the skin color looks like, what their shirt looks like, what their political, whatever these things that aren't about the blood being red or their soul being the same. We are getting too caught up on things that remove our own humanity from each other. I saw an interesting picture recently. It was two eggs. One was a brown egg and one was a white egg. And then right next to it, they were both cracked open with the shell next to it, but the yolks and everything looks the exact same. And they said, like, this is what people are. And to me, I was like, that's great. I'll send you the picture. I'll email it to you if you want.
That
But
is wonderful. I think this is a wonderful thing to do when you are in school or or any meeting.
yeah. So this was a really great conversation. I'd like to know if you've got anything else to add to it, or any message or resource that you think people should be looking for with regards to your story or World War II in general.
Well, I think that there are people who don't know much about the war. They are young and they are interested.
Mm-hmm.
And they're busy with their daily lives, whatever they do.
Yeah.
But people, especially young people, hear things, they listen. And if somebody doesn't stop talking about the anti-Semitism and about the hate for the black people, um, things are gonna be back to 1934, 35, 36.
I
That's when Hitler came into power, and he blamed everything on the Jews.
right. Yeah. I pray and I hope that we don't repeat what we did, even in the lifetime of you and other people who are still around to see it. I pray that none of us experience that, because we have so much more information about each other. We have so much more ability to connect and communicate that,
And we had so much that we can do good.
yeah.
There's so many things that we can help other people.
And I would say that I think what's amazing about your story, and even some people that I know, Americans who've experienced racism, let's say anti-black racism, et cetera, is people who can recognize how horrendous a certain leader or policy or law or culture can be to truly oppress you, but then also be able to, when the time comes, pick yourself up, pick your community up, pick your family up, and say, this happened. We don't want it to happen again. And the only way it can happen again is if we keep helping ourselves, helping others, and not trying to then finding a new way to hate people because of what happened, or finding a new way to hate because we're upset about this. We can't just let difficulty lead to hate, because I think it's such a slippery slope. And we are definitely feeling it now.
And I also wish that the Pope would say more, talk more to the people about the things that are happening.
Yeah.
There is too much silence, I feel, from the Pope.
I agree. I think there's too much silence right now, that there's so much, even in the attempt to be peaceful, it's like a hateful tone that people aren't really allowed to then come to the discussion, you know. And it's like, to me, I want all people, really, because we can all learn from each other, you know. And the fact that you hadn't seen a Black person until after you had been liberated was, the way you describe it, was a learning experience. It wasn't a, oh no, who is this new thing? You know, if that's your mentality to something new, life is going to be challenging, difficult, and depressing because there's always going to be challenges. And as you and I have discussed with our personal losses, with my brother and your daughter, you never know what someone's gone through. You know, you can never have that idea. You can never know what pain they're feeling. And the best thing you can do is always give them as much respect as possible, and try to be good, so they'll be good in return.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have
Okay.
many friends of different colors,
Yeah.
and I never think of them
Right.
of the color.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree. Thank God my parents were also like, we grew up in a really open house. We had all kinds of people over, even on Shabbat, whether they were Jewish or not. We just like, you know, I think people they're all God's creations, or they're all human creations, depending on the way you look at it. But if you start making reasons to hate, it ain't going to be good.
No, no, it's really up to the new generation
Yeah.
to teach them,
Okay.
to teach the others.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Rena. I hope that we get to talk again soon. It doesn't need to be in a recorded podcast. Um,
Pleasure talking to you.
yes. And I'm going to thank Michael again and Margie for setting this up. And can't wait to release this in a few weeks.